I'm Colonel Handy, and this is welding. There are two main types of welders for home use, the arc welder and the MIG welder. When arc welding, first thing you do is clamp the ground wire from the welder to the steel you're welding. Then you attach a rod to the stinger. When you touch the tip of the stinger to the steel, electrical current flows from the tip of the rod through the steel to the ground wire. It takes some practice, but the idea is to tap the tip of the rod against the steel, then pull it back just far enough that electricity arcs from the tip of the rod to the steel. If you're planning to weld very thin metal, MIG welder would be a better choice. When MIG welding, the first step is the same. Clamp the ground to your project. MIG welders use a thin wire fed from the welder instead of a stick. Clip off the tip of the wire at an angle, hold it close to your project and pull the trigger. The best way to adjust your settings on both welders is to find a piece of scrap metal, similar in thickness to your project, then run some tests. Don't be afraid to crank the settings around and see what happens. The more you practice, the easier it gets. Stick welders generally weld thick metal better, and it's easier to extend your leads. You just clamp one to the next. With the MIG welder, you're limited to the length of your hose. But the MIG welder welds thin metal beautifully, especially if you're using shielding gas. Using gas with a MIG welder makes your welds clean and cuts down on splatter and burning. Most beginners get started quicker with a MIG welder. Welding equipment can be very expensive, but don't be afraid to buy used as long as you stick with the brand names. I've used a cheap Harbor Freight welder on a few projects. It was set up with no gas, so it was loaded with flux core wire. I was welding 1/8" steel, and it did the job fine. The only issue was that on long welds, it would shut down every 10 minutes or so to cool itself off. In my shop at home, I have a stick welder and a MIG welder. The stick welder uses 240 volts and can run at high amperage for thick metal. The MIG welder runs on 120. I wish I had a bigger MIG welder, but it's nice to be able to weld thin stuff cleanly. We heat our home with firewood. On one of the coldest nights this winter, the door latch on our wood stove broke. If I hadn't had a welder, this would have been a bad night.
Homestead welding example, prime example. The door broke. So, I've got a welder, no problem. It's gonna be cold. See you in the shop. Man, it's cold out here. I'm not dressed for this. Beautiful. No adjustment needed. It's perfect. I'm Colonel Handy. Thanks for watching.